"Sir, can I sit here with you for a little while?" The soft voice of a little girl, no more than 6 years old, suddenly broke the late afternoon quiet of the park, where Alessandro Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, was sitting alone on a wooden bench, his eyes lost in the falling autumn leaves. Only days earlier, his convoy had been ambushed in broad daylight, and more than 10 of his most loyal men had fallen to protect him. He gave a small shake of his head, politely refusing, saying he only wanted a little quiet. Yet instead of walking away, the little girl simply smiled and quietly climbed onto the bench, sitting at a respectful distance from him, as if she somehow knew the stranger beside her carried a wound too heavy to speak of. No one could have imagined that this seemingly brief encounter would become the beginning of a story full of unexpected turns. And what happened after the conversation between these two people who had never met before would leave you looking at love, family, and forgiveness in a completely different way. Small feet swung under the wooden bench. Alessandro looked down for the first time since the little girl had climbed onto the seat beside him. Her sneakers barely cleared the ground. A single autumn leaf, caught between the wooden slats, brushed against the tip of one shoe every time it swung forward. Alessandro turned to look at her, his brow furrowed. "Didn't you hear what I just said?" Emma smiled. "I heard you. Then why are you still sitting here?" The little girl looked toward the small lake at the center of the park, then answered very calmly. "My mama said, when a person looks very sad, what they need most is not to be alone. What they need is someone to sit beside them, even if that someone does not say anything at all." For the first time in many years, Alessandro Moretti was left speechless by a child. He did not answer. He did not know how to answer. He only turned his eyes back toward the falling leaves and let the silence do the work his voice could not. In her lap sat a small woven basket, not a picnic basket, not a lunchbox. Something older, handmade, lined with a cloth that might once have been a kitchen towel, and inside 30 or 40 small stones, polished smooth by water and time, painted in every color a child could imagine. Sky blue, sunflower yellow, deep river green, a single one, at the very top, painted in careful pink. The little girl set the basket between them on the bench, close enough that Alessandro could see the paint had been done by a small hand, some strokes uneven, some perfectly straight, a few with tiny fingerprints still pressed into the drying color. She turned to him again, with the seriousness of a child conducting official business. "My name is Emma. I am 6.5. My mama helps a gardener near the park, so I know all the flowers here." Alessandro answered short. Alessandro, no last name, no title. He had not given his surname to a stranger without a purpose in 15 years. He gave none now. Emma did not seem to notice. She was already reaching into the basket, choosing stones with the concentration of a jeweler. She placed a smooth green stone on the flat wooden armrest of the bench, then a yellow one beside it, then a blue. "What are you making?" he asked, before he had decided to ask. Emma answered without looking up. "A house." "A house?" "A little house for someone who feels lonely." Alessandro's hand, the hand that 3 nights ago, had gripped a pistol until his knuckles went white, stilled in the air between them. He looked at her. She did not look back. She was still choosing stones, one by one, the way a small person builds something they truly believe in. After a moment, he reached forward almost by himself. He touched the edge of a small red stone at the top of her basket. "May I?" he asked. Emma nodded solemnly. "Only if you promise to put it somewhere the house can lean on." He picked up the stone, held it between his thumb and forefinger. It was warm, not from the sun, from her small hands, from having been carried for a long time. He placed it carefully, next to the yellow one, not clumsily, not fast, as if the arrangement of a small house for someone lonely, on the armrest of a park bench, required exactly the same discipline as everything else he had done in his life. Emma looked at it for a long moment. Then she smiled, and adjusted it half an inch to the left. "Now it will not fall," she said. Alessandro looked at her. A short breath of wind moved through the park. It lifted the red ribbon at the crown of her hair, then let it fall. Under the late afternoon light, her eyes flickered a strange shade of pale blue-gray, streaked with the faintest gold at the center. Somewhere deep in Alessandro's chest, a memory of his mother dead 10 years moved and turned, as if it, too, had just recognized something. He did not know why. He did not know yet. He only knew that, for the first time in 72 hours, his chest had stopped closing. Footsteps on the gravel path, light, slow, then a woman's voice, drifting through the late afternoon like something remembered from a long time ago. "Emma? Emma, where are you?" Alessandro froze. That voice, he would have recognized it after sleeping for 7 years. He would have recognized it at the bottom of the ocean. He turned his head slowly, the way a man turns when he already knows what he is about to see and does not want the knowing to be over too fast. She stood 2 steps away on the gravel path. Isabella Delgado. Long dark hair tied low at the base of her neck. Gray sweater. No makeup. No expensive coat. In her arms, a small brown paper grocery bag, the top of a red apple showing at the rim. She saw him. The paper bag slipped from her hands. The apple rolled out into the grass, turned once, and stopped in a small dip of soil near a patch of clover. Emma jumped down from the bench and ran to her, small feet pounding on the gravel, basket clutched at her chest. "Mama, I was talking to Uncle Alessandro. He is sad, but he is nice. He helped me build a house for someone who feels lonely." Isabella heard her daughter say his name. Her eyes filled instantly, without warning, but she did not let the tears fall. She bent down slowly, picked the apple up out of the grass, and brushed the dust from its skin, as if that were the only important task in the world. Alessandro rose from the bench, slow, careful. He did not step forward. He did not speak. 7 years pressed themselves into a single breath and held. Some silences are heavier than gunshots. This one had been waiting 7 years to be spoken, and neither of them knew how to break it in front of a child holding a basket of colored stones. Isabella reached out and touched the red ribbon at the top of Emma's hair. A small, unconscious gesture, the kind mothers make when they need to confirm that their child is still, in fact, right there beside them. "Say goodbye to the gentleman, sweetheart. We need to go home. Dinner is late." Emma scooped up her basket, turned back, and waved with the full enthusiasm of a 6-year-old. "Bye, Uncle Alessandro. Come back tomorrow, okay? The house is not finished yet." Alessandro could not speak. He only gave her a small nod. Isabella took her daughter's hand. She did not look at him, not once more, not even for a second, and turned away. Alessandro stood there and watched them disappear behind the row of trees at the far end of the path. The gravel accepted their footsteps and then let them go. The apple, forgotten, rolled a few more inches down the small slope of grass. It came to rest near the tip of his shoe. He bent down and picked it up. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a very long time, as if that ordinary piece of fruit were the only remaining evidence that the last 5 minutes of his life had actually happened. On the wooden armrest of the bench, the little house of colored stones still stood, unfinished. Emma had not come back for it. Alessandro carefully lifted each stone, one by one, and slipped them into the inside pocket of his coat, near his heart. Then he saw it. On the grass where Isabella had bent to retrieve the apple, a small business card had fallen out of her pocket. Cream paper. A single pressed flower printed in the corner. 3 words. Rosa Flowers Queens. Alessandro picked it up and held it between his fingers. He had thought she was dead. He had almost preferred it because if she was dead, he had not been abandoned. Standing beside a bench and a rolling apple, Alessandro Moretti realized he had been wrong about both, and that the next chapter of his life had just walked away from him wearing a gray sweater. It took him 2 days. Not because the address was hard to find, because Alessandro Moretti had refused to use a single resource of the organization to find it. No calls to the men who tracked things for a living. No favors from anyone who owed him one. Just a business card in his coat pocket and a slow, personal search through a corner of the city he had never bothered to know. The house sat on a quiet street in Queens, 2 stories, narrow, painted a pale cream that had been touched by too many summers. A dying sunflower in a chipped clay pot leaned against the front railing. Beside the door, a pair of small yellow rain boots waited patiently on the mat, one tipped slightly against the other, and along the porch, running the full length of the wooden edge, a small line of hand-painted stones stood shoulder to shoulder like a tiny fence guarding a tiny kingdom. Alessandro stood by the low iron gate for a long moment before he touched the bell. Inside the pocket of his coat, the stones Emma had left behind still rested against his ribs. Isabella opened the door. Her face did not register surprise. She looked at him the way a person looks at the arrival of something they have been quietly expecting for a long time, perhaps since the exact moment the apple had rolled out of her paper bag onto the park grass. She stepped back and let him in. She did not embrace him. She did not offer her hand. She only said, softly, "Emma is taking her nap. We speak quietly." Inside, the house was simple and clean and warm. A child's crayon drawing was fastened to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a bee, a little cream house with 3 round birds standing on the roof. Above the small kitchen table hung a wooden cross, dark from age, its edges softened by years of being handled by grateful hands. Alessandro looked at that cross for one heartbeat, and the memory hit him quietly, the same cross above a narrow bed in a Brooklyn studio. 7 years ago, where Isabella had once fallen asleep against his shoulder while the radiator hummed in the wall. She poured coffee. Her hands trembled, only slightly. He noticed, then, the thin silver chain at her collar. A small silver locket rested just above the neckline of her sweater, half hidden by the fold of the wool. He recognized it immediately. He had given it to her, an 8th birthday gift, in a life that had once belonged to both of them. He said nothing about the locket. Instead, he reached into his coat and gently placed the little colored stones on the kitchen table, one by one. Blue, yellow, green, the red one. Last, she left these behind. Isabella looked down at the stones. Her hand, halfway to the sugar bowl, stopped in the air. She lowered herself into the chair across from him without taking her eyes from the small line of color he had just placed on her table. "Why did you never say goodbye?" he asked, very quietly. She stared at her coffee cup for a long time. She did not answer directly. She asked back, "Are you still doing what you were doing?" Alessandro did not reply. His silence was the answer, and both of them knew it. Isabella gave a small, slow nod. "Then you already have my answer." He did not ask again. He let his eyes move around the kitchen, searching for anything that might tell him whether he had the right to stay in these two lives at all. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a strawberry, a child's schedule was written in careful pencil. Tuesday art class, Thursday help mama at the garden, Saturday morning park, collect stones. He memorized it. He did not write it down. Isabella walked him to the door. Before he stepped through, she stopped him with a hand that did not quite touch his sleeve. "You may come back," she said. "But if you come back, you come as Alessandro, not as Boss Moretti. I will not let both men walk into this house." He would come back 3 more times before he asked the question he was truly afraid to ask, and by then, his own eyes in the bathroom mirror had already begun to answer it for him. He came back 3 times over the next 2 weeks. The first time, he brought a small box of pastries from a Sicilian bakery in Brooklyn, the kind Isabella used to like, though he did not say so. The second time, a picture book about a girl who kept a garden of impossible flowers. The third time, a wooden case of 36 colored pencils, sharpened, arranged in a soft velvet tray. Emma opened the case and gasped as if he had handed her a small piece of the sky. "Uncle Ale, are these all for me? All of them?" "All of them." She had started calling him Uncle Ale sometime during the second visit. He had not asked her to. She had simply decided. Isabella remained watchful. She did not stop the visits, but she never sat with him in the same room without a doorway between herself and the kitchen, as if she were still deciding, day by day, whether to close a door or open it. Alessandro noticed things, small things, things a man who had built an empire on details could not pretend not to see. Emma tilted her head slightly to the left. When she concentrated the exact angle he tilted his own head when reading a financial report. She bit her lower lip when a drawing became difficult the exact way he bit his lip when working through a plan. She arranged her new colored pencils by the spectrum, red on the left, violet on the right, the exact system he had used to organize his files since he was 15 years old. He did not mention any of it. On the third visit, Emma fell in the small back garden. Her knee split open on a stone edge, and blood welled through the fabric of her jeans. Alessandro knelt in front of her and pressed his handkerchief gently against the wound. She did not cry. She looked up at him with steady blue-gray eyes and said, quietly, "My daddy is probably like you. He does not know how to cry either." Alessandro froze. His hand stopped in mid-motion above her knee. From the kitchen doorway, Isabella went very still. Her hand tightened on the edge of the counter until her knuckles went white. That night, Alessandro drove back alone to the empty penthouse in Manhattan. He did not turn on the main lights. He went straight to the bathroom, placed both hands on the marble counter, and looked at his own eyes in the mirror. Blue-gray, a faint streak of gold at the inner ring of the iris. The same eyes as Emma's, the same eyes as his mother's. Elena Moretti had died 10 years ago. He had never met another person with those exact eyes, until Queen's. He placed one hand flat against the glass of the mirror. He did not strike it. He did not push. He only left his palm there, as if he needed the mirror to hold him up for a moment. He remembered the visit before this one. Emma had been rearranging the little woven basket at the kitchen table, carefully placing the red stone on the top of the pile. She had lifted the basket to show him. "Look, Uncle Ale, this one is like the one you put on the little house for the lonely person. I put it in the same place." Isabella had called from the stove, without looking up. "Careful with your stones, sweetheart. Tomorrow we go back to the park and build again. He had not asked, but he had known. The eyes were not a coincidence. The habits were not a coincidence. The child was not a coincidence. He would not sleep tonight unless he confirmed it. He picked up his phone and called Dr. Enrico Falcone, the Moretti family physician for over 20 years. The one man in New York who understood that certain calls were made only once and never repeated. Enrico, I need a DNA test. No file, no witness, only you and me. Some truths do not need proof. But Alessandro Moretti had spent his entire life learning to trust only what he could hold in his hand, and tomorrow, he would decide that he needed to hold this one too, even if the holding of it would break him. He came the next afternoon. He brought Emma a small silver comb shaped like a butterfly, not extravagant, not the kind of thing that would draw attention, something a girl could hold in her palm and treasure for the rest of her childhood. Emma opened the little velvet pouch and made a sound of pure delight, the kind of sound only a child who has not yet learned to hide joy can make. Uncle Ale, it has wings. Look, Mama, it has wings. She ran to the small wall mirror above the kitchen sideboard and began to comb her hair with the seriousness of a queen preparing for a coronation. Isabella stood at the kitchen sink, drying a plate with a towel that had already been dried too many times. Her eyes did not leave Emma, not once. Alessandro sat at the small dining table. He drank the tea Isabella had poured him without being asked. He spoke quietly with Emma about what she had drawn that morning, and which flowers were blooming in the small greenhouse where her mother helped the gardener 3 afternoons a week. Emma answered every question with the detail of a botanist and the confidence of a 6-year-old who believed she knew things. When she set the little butterfly comb on the table and ran into the next room to fetch her sketchbook, Alessandro moved. Slowly, without hurry, he drew a silk handkerchief from the inside pocket of his coat. He wrapped the comb inside the folded silk. He placed the small bundle back into his pocket. He looked up. Isabella stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. She did not speak. She only looked at him the way a person looks when they have understood something they had not asked to understand. Alessandro did not move. He met her gaze across the small kitchen. 7 years, and a silver comb rested in the air between them. Isabella turned first. She bent to take a dish towel from the counter and began wiping the table as if that motion were more natural than the conversation neither of them was ready to have. "Uncle Ale," she said, without lifting her eyes, "will you stay for dinner?" "I cannot tonight," he answered softly. She nodded. She did not press. She did not ask why. Before he stepped through the front door, she handed him a small brown paper bag. Her voice was quiet and steady. "Cookies. Emma made most of them herself. You have gotten thinner." Alessandro took the bag. He did not answer. He walked out. Marco Ricci was waiting beside the car, 10 years at Alessandro's right hand. The only man in the organization to whom Alessandro had ever handed his back without hesitation. Marco tilted his head, casual, familiar. "Everything all right, boss?" Alessandro handed him the silk-wrapped comb. "Take this to Falcone. No one else knows." Marco accepted the bundle. His fingers closed around it, and for the smallest fraction of a second, half a heartbeat. No more. His eyes flicked toward the small, cream-colored house behind them, toward the window where a curtain moved. Alessandro was already lowering himself into the back seat. He did not see it. Marco placed the silk bundle on the passenger seat with great care. He started the engine. He drove. He did not speak the entire way back to Manhattan. Alessandro rested his head against the cool window. The streetlights of Queens smeared past in long ribbons of amber and white. He opened the paper bag Isabella had given him. Inside, 6 little cookies in the shape of tiny birds. And beneath them, folded twice, a small handwritten note in Isabella's careful script. "If you come back again, be sure you know what you are stepping into." Alessandro read the note 3 times. Then he folded it again and slipped it into the inside chest pocket of his coat, the same pocket that still carried, wrapped in a smaller square of cloth, the red-painted stone Emma had let him hold on the day they met on the park bench. He had trusted Marco Ricci with his life for 10 years. He would not learn, until it was almost too late, that trust when placed in the wrong hand is the sharpest blade a powerful man can hand his own killer. 3 days. 3 days of not going back to Queens. 3 days of not calling. 3 days of walking past the small paper bag of bird-shaped cookies on his kitchen counter without opening it. On the morning of the 4th day, the envelope arrived. It came the way all things from Dr. Enrico Falcone arrived, hand-delivered, unmarked, wrapped in a second envelope with no return address. Alessandro carried it up to his private office on the 42nd floor and placed it in the exact center of his desk. He did not open it. He stood by the tall window instead, hands in his pockets, and looked down at the city. The office was quiet. The morning light came through the glass in long, cold panels and fell across the polished floor. He had held the envelope in his hand all morning. He had not been able to break the seal. His mind moved in the shape of two possibilities, over and over. If Emma was his daughter, then Isabella had hidden the truth from him for 6 years. It meant she had decided, at some point in a Brooklyn studio while he was rising through the ranks, that a life without him would be better for their child than a life with him. He did not know which would hurt more, the anger, the grief, or the shame of understanding she might have been right. He looked down at the black leather notebook on his desk. 78 names. 15 years of quiet orders. 15 years of a machine that ran because he told it to run. He had never asked himself how many of those 78 names had left children behind. It took a 6-year-old with a basket of colored stones to make him finally ask, and the answer was one he would carry to his grave. A knock at the door. Marco entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. 10 years of routine had made certain doors open under his hand without asking. "Anything else, boss?" Alessandro shook his head. "No, thank you." Marco set the coffee on the desk. As he turned to leave, his eyes moved a quick, casual glance toward the sealed envelope, resting a hand's width from Alessandro's fingers. Half a second, no more. Then Marco smiled, polite as always, and stepped back into the outer hallway. The door closed behind him with the soft click of a well-trained latch. Alessandro did not think about it. He had larger things pressing against his chest. He picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. One sheet of paper, Enrico Falcone's careful handwriting at the top, a single line of numbers at the bottom. Paternity confirmed. 99.997%. Alessandro did not move for a full 5 minutes. Then he folded the paper in half, opened the lower drawer of his desk, placed the paper inside, closed the drawer, and turned the key. He stood up. He walked to the window. Down below, the traffic moved in slow rivers of red and white. Somewhere out there, past the bridges, past the boroughs, past 6 years of nights he had not been present for, a woman was slicing apples for a small girl who had already learned to bite her lip when she drew something difficult. He thought of Isabella alone through morning sickness, alone through the night of labor, alone cutting a 3rd birthday cake, a 4th, a 5th, a 6th. He did not feel anger toward her. He felt himself, for the first time in 15 years, becoming smaller. He picked up the phone on his desk and dialed the garage directly. "Bring the car around. Queens. No guards. Not Marco." The driver hesitated on the line. "Sir, Marco left instructions. I know what Marco left. Drive." He was going to ask her one question, just one, and her answer would decide not only whether the next chapter of his life began, but whether he had ever truly been alive at all in the 15 years he thought he was ruling a kingdom. He arrived at the small cream-colored house at 10 o'clock at night. The living room lamp was still on. A soft yellow square of light glowed behind the curtain, the shape of a home waiting for someone who might or might not come. Isabella opened the door before he knocked. She saw him. She did not ask why. She only opened the door wider and stepped back into the hallway, the way a person makes room for something they have known was coming for a long time. Emma was already asleep upstairs. The little silver butterfly comb rested on her bedside table, catching the faint light from the hall. Alessandro walked into the kitchen. He unfolded the sheet of paper from Falcone and placed it, without a word, in the exact center of the small wooden table. Isabella looked at the paper. She did not pick it up. She did not need to. She lowered herself into the chair across from him and covered her face with both hands. Alessandro did not shout. He did not strike the table. He did not raise his voice at all. He only asked, in a voice worn thin by 15 years and 3 days of silence, "Why, Isa?" Isabella began to cry. It was the first time he had seen her cry in 7 years. She did not turn her face away. She did not try to hide it. She let the tears come the way a person lets a wound bleed after keeping it closed too long. "I knew I was pregnant 3 weeks after your father died," she said, when she could speak. "The night I meant to tell you. There was an explosion at one of the restaurants. A pregnant woman was inside. 3 children, too. I sat on the bed and listened to the news on the radio, and I put my hand on my stomach, and I understood everything." She looked up at him. Her eyes were red. Her voice was very steady. "I was not afraid of you, Alessandro. I was afraid of the world around you. I was afraid of the day I would have to explain to our daughter why her father did not come home for dinner, why he was never coming home again." She told him about the first 6 years. 2 jobs, nights spent teaching Emma to read at the kitchen table, a different last name for the school forms, never her real one, never his, a birthday cake every year lit with candles she blew out by herself while a small girl clapped and did not yet know to ask about a father. She said the word happiness the way people say the word danger. In your world, happiness is a target. She told him there had been 3 nights, over the years, when she had picked up the phone. 3 nights she had held it in her hand. 3 nights she had not dialed the last number. There is a kind of love that stays, and there is a kind of love that leaves because it stays. Isabella Delgado had chosen the second, and it had cost her every single day for 2,312 nights of listening for footsteps that never came, and secretly praying they never would. Alessandro did not speak. He rose from his chair. He walked around the small kitchen table. He knelt beside her and lowered his forehead against her knees, the way a boy might, the way a man who has run out of words might. Isabella placed her hand on his hair. Her fingers were trembling. "I am sorry," she whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he whispered back. "I am the one who owes the apology." She stroked his hair, slowly, over and over. She did not answer. She did not agree. She did not deny. When Alessandro finally stood up, something inside him had already begun to close a door that had been open for the 20 years he had spent inside the shadow world. He did not say he would leave the life that night, but when he walked out of her kitchen and into the Queen's dark, he was already counting for the first time the price of leaving, and finding it, for once, smaller than the price of staying. He arranged everything in 7 days. The house in Westchester was already his, held under a name that appeared on no public record. Alessandro had bought it 4 years ago, told no one, and let it stand empty. Now he opened the gates. Stone walls 12 feet high, cameras at every angle, a security system that had cost more than most people's homes, 2 emergency exits, one through the back garden, one through a service tunnel that ended 2 blocks away, 10 hand-picked bodyguards, each selected personally by Marco Ricci, because Marco was the man Alessandro trusted without reservation. Emma loved the new house. There was a wide back garden. There was a small apple tree that had been planted years before by someone who would never eat its fruit. There was a bedroom on the 2nd floor with pale yellow walls and a window that looked out at the sky. In the small backpack Emma had insisted on carrying herself from Queens, she brought the woven basket of colored stones. On the first morning at the new house, she carried the basket out to the brick steps behind the kitchen and began to build. Not a small house on an armrest this time. A larger house, a stronger one. Isabella watched her from the kitchen window and did not smile. She turned to Alessandro. "I do not want Emma to grow up believing the world needs high walls to be safe. It is temporary," he said. "I am arranging things." She looked at him for a long moment. "Arranging what, Ale?" He did not answer clearly. But for the first time in 15 years, he was asking himself whether there was a way to step out. That afternoon, Alessandro knelt in the soft earth of the back garden with Emma, planting a row of sunflower seedlings, small trowels, small hands. A small girl who worked with the seriousness of a farmer. She looked up at him with dirt on her cheek. "Uncle Ale, are you my daddy?" Alessandro froze. The trowel in his hand stopped in mid-motion, halfway between the soil and the pot. Emma smiled at him, a small, patient smile, and said, "It is okay. I already asked Mama. She said when you are ready to tell me, you will tell me. I can wait." Alessandro could not speak. He only lowered his head, pushed the trowel back into the soil, and kept working. His hand was shaking. At the far end of the garden, Marco Ricci stood by the iron gate and watched. No one noticed his face. It was cold, and there was no trace of a smile on it. He drew his phone from the inside of his jacket, tapped the screen briefly, and sent a short message to a number that had no name. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and became, once again, the loyal right hand. Later that afternoon, Marco reported to Alessandro in the study. "Boss, 3 of the 10 new men are ready to run the school escort tomorrow morning. I have mapped the safest route personally." Alessandro nodded. "Good. Can you handle tonight as well?" "I want to stay here with Isa and Emma." "Of course, boss." Marco turned and walked out. There was a very thin smile on his lips as he crossed the threshold, and Alessandro did not see it. That night, Alessandro leaned over Emma's small bed and kissed her forehead. The basket of colored stones sat on the nightstand beside her, the red one still on top. Her breathing was slow and even. He turned toward the doorway. Isabella stood there, moonlight behind her, arms folded across her chest. He said, quietly, "Will you give me a chance to make it right?" She did not answer. She only leaned her forehead against the doorframe and cried without a sound. He believed the walls were enough. He believed the men he had chosen would keep her safe. In 72 hours, He would learn that walls only stop enemies who come from outside, and that the deadliest ones had already been living inside them for 10 years. Tuesday morning. The sky was clear. 7:30. Emma stood in the front hall of the Westchester house in her yellow raincoat, her small rabbit-shaped backpack strapped across her shoulders, the red ribbon in her hair, the same red ribbon she had worn on the day she first sat beside a stranger on a park bench, sat crooked at the crown of her head. In the front pocket of her backpack, she had carefully placed 3 colored stones the night before. 1 blue, 1 yellow, 1 red. She patted the pocket now with the seriousness of a small person carrying an important secret. "I brought my lucky stones," she said. Isabella crouched in front of her and adjusted the ribbon. She kissed both of her daughter's cheeks and held her face for 1 second longer than a normal goodbye. Alessandro stood in the doorway. He bent down and kissed Emma on the forehead. Uncle Ale will pick you up at 3. The word had slipped out. He had almost called himself her father for the first time. He did not correct it beyond that small hesitation. Emma grinned at him. "I heard that." She skipped down the front steps toward the waiting cars. 3 vehicles left the estate at 7:32. Marco Ricci rode in the second car, in charge of the convoy. The convoy passed West 42nd Street at 7:45. At 7:46, the GPS signal on all 3 vehicles cut out at the same instant. The nearest street cameras, every camera within a 3-block radius, went dark in the same second. A rolling shadow of nothing swept across the surveillance grid for exactly 7 minutes and 40 seconds. When the signal came back, the picture that returned was already still. 2 escort vehicles sat crooked at the curb, one nose down against a low concrete barrier. The bodyguards inside were slumped against the windows, unconscious. Later analysis would find traces of a fast-acting sedative gas released through the ventilation system. The middle car, the car carrying Emma, was empty. Both back doors stood open. On the rear seat, where a small girl had been sitting only minutes before, a single red ribbon lay curled against the leather. Beside it, 1 blue stone had rolled out of an open backpack and come to rest against the seam of the seat. Alessandro was in a meeting on the 42nd floor at 7:53 when the call came through. He did not stand up immediately. He set his coffee cup down on the polished conference table, very slowly, and he asked, "Where is Marco?" The voice on the other end was shaking. "Marco is already on scene, boss. He is calling in the units. He is safe." Alessandro was silent for 1 full second. "He is safe," he repeated inside his own head. 3 cars, 2 attacked. Marco in the second car. Marco, the one man untouched. Something inside his stomach tightened. It was not intuition. It was older than intuition. It was the instinct of a man who had spent 15 years understanding when a scene was too clean. But he had no time to analyze it. He had one thing to do first, and it was the hardest thing he would do that day. He had to be the person who told Isabella. He drove himself. He did not take a guard. He did not call ahead. She met him at the front door of the Westchester house with her arms already wrapped around her ribs, as if her body had understood before her mind. He did not have to say it. She sank to her knees in the entryway. Alessandro caught her under the arms and lowered himself with her onto the polished stone floor. She did not cry aloud. She only gripped his wrist with both hands, her fingernails cutting small red half-moons into his skin. He did not pull his hand away. She whispered against his shoulder, "Bring her back, Ale, whatever it takes." He answered, "I promise." He had promised her Emma would be safe behind those walls. Now he had to promise her something harder, that he would bring their daughter back, whatever it cost him. And what it would cost, he did not yet know, was the last illusion he still held about the men he had trusted with his life. 3 hours after Emma disappeared, the email arrived. No sender name, no reply address, only a subject line consisting of a single word "watch" and a 30-second video attachment. Alessandro opened it in his study at the Westchester house. Marco stood beside him, hands folded behind his back, eyes lowered. The video began. Emma sat in a wooden chair in the middle of an empty warehouse. Her wrists were bound in front of her with a length of thin rope. Her yellow raincoat had been removed and set to one side. Her hair was still tied with the red ribbon, though loosened now, tilted. She was not crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her small chin was held up in that stubborn way children hold themselves when they are pretending to be brave for someone watching. In her lap, gripped tight between both small hands, was the red painted stone from her basket. She held it the way another child might hold a stuffed animal. Behind her, stepping into the frame with the slow authority of a man who had already decided he had won, was Vito Salieri. Vito Salieri, the rival boss Alessandro had been in open conflict with for 5 years. Vito spoke calmly, almost affectionately, into the camera. Ale. Turn over the entire Southern Territory. Dissolve the organization. 6 hours. Otherwise, the girl comes home to you in a black bag. The video ended. Alessandro closed the laptop with a slow, deliberate motion. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse. He did not move at all for a long moment. Marco cleared his throat gently. Boss, perhaps we should negotiate. The girl Vito will never let Emma go alive, Alessandro said flatly, cutting him off. If I hand over the territory, she dies, and the entire organization dies with her. This is not a negotiation. This is a trap. Marco went quiet. Alessandro did not notice, in that instant, how the quality of that silence had shifted from the silence of 10 years past. He turned his head slowly and looked at Marco. You think I should negotiate? Marco answered too quickly. No, boss. I am only thinking of Emma. Alessandro nodded, but inside his head, a single grain of dust had fallen small, silent, undeniable into a place where nothing had ever fallen before. He walked into the kitchen. Isabella sat at the table, her hands trembling around the woven basket. She had emptied Emma's colored stones onto the wood in a small, careful pile. She was counting them, one by one, the way a mother counts anything she can still hold. One stone was missing. What are you going to do? She asked, without looking up. Alessandro knelt in front of her and took both her hands into his own. I am going to bring her back. Do you trust me? She lifted her eyes to his. Her tears fell onto the back of his hand. I trust you. But you must promise me one more thing, Ale. You must come home to her too. He did not answer with words. He only lowered his head and pressed his lips gently against her knuckles. That night, Alessandro summoned his 8 most trusted men to the sub-basement room of the old Moretti brownstone in Brooklyn, the room whose iron door only opened to a key that Marco Ricci had never held. He did not call Marco into this meeting. He turned to Salvatore Jr., the young man whose father had died 3 weeks earlier in the daylight ambush that had begun everything. You will lead the primary strike team. Marco will command the support unit. Salvatore Jr. looked up, startled. Boss? Marco has always led the primary. Why this time? Alessandro answered very quietly. Because this time I need him where I can see him. He was going to walk into a trap. The only question left was whether he would walk out with his daughter or with the answer to a question he was starting to dread, asking about the man who had stood at his right hand for a decade. The map of Red Hook lay unfolded across the wooden table in the sub-basement room. The abandoned industrial dock had been marked in careful red ink. 3 warehouses, a network of service corridors, an old drainage tunnel that ran west to east under the loading yards. Vito Salieri was holed up in the central warehouse. Alessandro laid out the plan with the calm of a man who had already accepted the shape of the danger ahead. 6 men would strike from the east. A loud, obvious assault. Enough noise and gunfire to make the enemy commit their reserves. Salvatore Jr. would lead them. Alessandro himself, with 3 men, Rocco, Giuseppe, and Antonio, would enter from the west, silent, through the old drainage tunnel, straight toward the room where Emma was being held. Marco Ricci would command the eastern assault beside Salvatore Jr. Marco raised his objection immediately, before Alessandro had even finished speaking. Boss, I should go in with you. It is too dangerous with only 3 men. You need someone at your back. Alessandro looked at him. He held the look for 1.5 seconds, long enough for anyone paying attention to feel it. You are more valuable, commanding the primary assault. That is where you will be, Marco nodded, but a small muscle jumped at the corner of his jaw and stayed there, moving faintly, as if some smaller part of him had been unable to obey the larger one. Across the table, Salvatore Jr. lifted his eyes to Alessandro's face. Alessandro gave him the smallest nod, an instruction that did not need to be said aloud. Watch him. Salvatore Jr. nodded back. Once, at the Westchester house, Isabella waited. Alessandro had assigned her 2 personal bodyguards, chosen by him alone, not by Marco. She had barely spoken since the video. She sat in the small side room off the kitchen, where she had hung the wooden cross she had brought with her from Queens. Her lips were moving without sound. Before Alessandro walked to the car, he turned back into the house and climbed the stairs to Emma's bedroom. The little bed was still made. The colored basket sat on the nightstand where Emma had left it, minus the red stone that had traveled with her. He picked up the small stuffed rabbit that Emma always tucked under her chin when she slept. He tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of his coat, against his ribs. Beside it, he slipped the 2 remaining stones from her backpack, the yellow one and the blue one. He came down the stairs. Isabella stood at the base of the staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister. She did not speak. Her other hand had risen without her thinking about it, and her fingers touched the small silver locket at the base of her throat. The locket he had noticed in the Queen's kitchen, the one he had given her 8 years ago, the one he now understood she had worn every day of the 7 years she had lived without him. Alessandro stepped forward. He took her hand, gently, and placed it back against the locket, holding both together for a heartbeat. "I will come home," Isabella whispered. "I know. But Ale, be careful of the man standing next to you." He went very still. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "I do not know. I only have a feeling. I am sorry." He did not answer. He kissed her forehead. He kissed the top of the little stuffed rabbit tucked against his chest. He closed the door behind him. He thought the war ahead would be with Vito Salieri. He was about to learn that the real war had been living inside his own inner circle for years, and that the only person who had sensed it, without ever meeting the traitor, was the woman he had abandoned 7 years ago in a Brooklyn studio. Night. Fog rolled in from the mouth of Red Hook Bay, slow and silver. The dock lights burned yellow above the black water. Their reflections stretched into long, shivering columns. The air smelled of rusted steel and diesel oil, and beneath both, faintly, of old salt. 9:10. At the eastern edge of the industrial yard, Salvatore Jr. and Marco Ricci launched the strike on schedule. Gunfire cracked against the corrugated walls of the outer warehouses. Muzzle flashes lit the fog in sharp white bursts. Somewhere across the loading yard, a gasoline barrel took a round and coughed a low orange bloom into the night. The distraction worked. Vito Salieri's men poured toward the sound, boots hammering on wet concrete. Alessandro, Rocco, Giuseppe, and Antonio moved on the west side, unseen. They dropped into the old drainage tunnel through a rusted iron grate behind a chain-link fence. The water was cold and knee-deep. The walls sweated. Every footfall echoed off the curved brick above them. 9:22. They surfaced through a broken maintenance hatch inside the western yard. It was quiet. Too quiet. Rocco crouched beside Alessandro and whispered, "Boss, there should be more men on this side." Alessandro nodded once. "Move. Warehouse A, empty. Only forklifts under canvas tarps. Warehouse B, empty. Only pallets stacked to the ceiling. Warehouse C, the central one." They approached from the shadowed western entrance. Alessandro pushed the sliding door open, a hand's width. Inside, a single industrial lamp hung from a low iron chain in the center of the ceiling, swaying faintly. The light fell in a pale yellow circle across the concrete floor. Stacks of wooden pallets and cardboard boxes rose in tall columns on either side, casting deep, uneven shadows against the walls. At the far end of the warehouse, an old wooden chair had been placed in the middle of the lit circle. In the chair sat a small figure. Emma, head lowered, her yellow raincoat stained with grease and dirt. The red ribbon was no longer in her hair. It lay curled on the concrete beside her small foot. In her lap, held tight between both bound hands, the red painted stone rested against the fabric of her jeans. Alessandro moved fast. Rocco covered their rear. Giuseppe swept left. Antonio swept right. Emma heard the footsteps. She lifted her head. Her eyes widened. Her face broke open in a way only a child's face can break open when hope is confirmed after too much fear. "Daddy." Alessandro stopped for half a second, when he heard the word the first time in his life anyone had called him that out loud. Then he ran to her. He cut the ropes from her wrists. He pulled her against his chest. She began to cry, not the crying of fear, but the crying of a child who has finally been found. "I knew you would come," she whispered into his neck. "I kept the red stone. It is a lucky stone." Alessandro bent and picked up the red ribbon from the floor. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, beside the 2 other stones and the small stuffed rabbit. Then he drew the rabbit out and pressed it into Emma's hands along with the red stone she was already holding. She squeezed the rabbit hard against her cheek. Alessandro lifted her into his arms and turned toward the doorway they had come through. At that exact moment, from the western entrance, he heard a woman's voice. "Ale," Rocco spun, weapon rising toward the door. Alessandro's arm shot out. "No! Wait!" A figure stood in the frame of the western doorway. No body armor, no weapon in her hands, only a gray coat she had not had time to button, and her breath coming fast and white in the cold air. Isabella. He should have been running out that door with his daughter in his arms. Instead, he was frozen because the woman he loved had just walked into a trap he had not yet understood was closing behind them all. Alessandro had not fully turned back yet. The stuffed rabbit was pressed against Emma's cheek. The red stone was clutched in her small fist. The red ribbon was folded in the inside pocket of his coat, near his heart. Emma was in his arms, warm and shaking and alive. Isabella stood in the western doorway, breathing hard. Her gray coat was streaked with dust, one sleeve torn at the elbow. Her hair had come loose from the low knot at her neck. Alessandro stared at her. "How did you get here?" "I got past the 2 guards at the house," she said quickly, still catching her breath. "I followed the second car. I could not sit at that house and wait for you to die, Ale." Alessandro felt something in the air shift. His 3 men were still outside: Rocco, Giuseppe, Antonio. He had heard no exchange. He had heard no challenge. He had heard nothing at all. Why had they let her pass? He turned his head slightly toward the western doorway. Rocco, Giuseppe, Antonio, no answer. Only the faint hum of the swinging industrial lamp above them. Alessandro moved fast. He turned and pressed Emma gently into Isabella's arms. "Hold her tight. Do not look behind you." Isabella took Emma against her chest without a question. At that exact moment, from the deep shadow between 2 tall stacks of cardboard boxes at the far side of the warehouse, a figure stepped into the pale yellow light. A familiar coat, familiar polished shoes, a familiar, easy smile. Marco Ricci. In his right hand was a pistol. The safety was already off. The hammer was already cocked. Alessandro looked at him. Marco looked back. The whole warehouse seemed to stop breathing. The lamp above them creaked once on its iron chain. Alessandro said, very quietly, "Which way did you come in, Marco?" Marco did not answer. He only smiled the smile of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time, and who was, at last, being paid for the wait. From the eastern door, a burst of gunfire cracked into the warehouse. Salvatore Jr. stumbled inside, his left shoulder soaked red, one arm hooked around Rocco's chest. Rocco was still breathing but could no longer stand, his boots dragging across the concrete floor as Salvatore Jr. half-carried him. Outside, Giuseppe and Antonio were still trading fire with someone Alessandro could not see, holding the eastern approach. Salvatore Jr. saw Marco. He saw the pistol trained on Alessandro's chest. He raised his own weapon in a single motion. Marco shook his head slowly, almost gently. "Put it down, Sal, or I will kill him and the child." Salvatore Jr.'s eyes shot to Alessandro's face. Alessandro nodded. Once, small, exact. Salvatore Jr. lowered his weapon and set it flat on the concrete floor. He kicked it, sliding it across the smooth surface toward Marco's boots. It stopped a foot away. Inside the pale circle of light, only 5 people remained. Alessandro, unarmed. Isabella, in the corner, holding Emma against her chest, her body angled so that her back would take anything that came. Salvatore Jr. and Rocco, both unarmed, both bleeding. And Marco Ricci, with a cocked pistol and the patient smile of a man who had already tried and executed the man in front of him inside his own head for years. He had trusted this man with his life for 10 years. He was about to learn that trust, given to the wrong hand, is the sharpest blade a man can hand his own killer, and that the price of that blade would not be paid by him alone. Alessandro straightened slowly, turning his body fully toward Marco. Behind him, Isabella tightened her arms around Emma and began to take small, careful steps backward toward the corner of the warehouse. Alessandro's voice was low and steady. "You were behind the ambush 3 weeks ago." Marco did not answer with words. He tilted his head slightly to the right, the way a man acknowledges an old debt he has no intention of denying. "You were behind Emma's kidnapping." Marco laughed quietly. It was almost gentle. "Boss, you are so slow." He raised the pistol. The barrel came up level with Alessandro's chest, steady as a mounted rifle. Alessandro did not raise a weapon. He had none to raise. He only looked at Marco across the pale circle of light and asked the only question left. "Why, Marco?" Marco's smile did not move. His eyes did. "Because I have spent 10 years of my life standing in your shadow. I stood beside you and greeted your father when he was alive. I bowed to you when he died. I killed for you. I slept in cars for you. I did not take a wife because your work would not allow me one. And you have everything. You have the power. You have the respect of every family in this city. And now you have a woman and a daughter as well. And what do I have?" He did not wait for an answer. There was no answer that could have been given. Betrayal never begins with hatred. It begins with a small, unanswered ache, a bill nobody remembered was owed. By the time it grows into a bullet aimed at the man you once called brother, it is too late to pay it back with anything except blood. Marco squeezed the trigger. In the half-second before the gunshot, Isabella moved. She had already lowered Emma to the concrete floor. A heartbeat earlier placed her behind a wooden pallet with hands that had known, somehow, exactly what was coming. She sprang from the corner and drove her shoulder into Alessandro's chest, pushing him hard to the right. Emma screamed, "Mama!" The shot cracked through the warehouse. Isabella jolted to a stop, mid-motion, as if the air itself had grabbed her. Her hand rose to her chest. Beneath her fingers, a dark stain spread through the gray wool of her sweater, deep and wet and blooming outward like something alive. She turned her head toward Alessandro. She smiled a small, weak, unafraid smile, not the smile of a woman who had been shot, the smile of a woman who had just done the only thing she had left in the world to do. Then her knees gave. Alessandro caught her as she fell. He lowered her to the concrete floor and pressed his palm against her chest. The blood came up warm through the wool and onto his fingers. Emma crawled out from behind the pallet and dropped to her knees beside her mother. She did not cry aloud. She only took her mother's hand and pressed the red-painted stone against the wound in her mother's chest, with both small hands, as if a lucky stone might still know how to stop what a bullet had started. Marco stood where he had fired from. Smoke curled thin and blue from the barrel of the pistol. He was not smiling anymore. Something on his face looked almost like regret. But it was too late for it to matter. Salvatore Jr., forgotten in that half-second, bent slowly and lifted his weapon from the concrete. He had lost men in his life. He had buried a father. He had watched a war widow spit at his feet, but he had never known what it meant to feel his own heart bleeding out onto a warehouse floor in someone else's chest until now. Holding the woman who had just proved that love, in the end, is louder than any gun. Alessandro lowered Isabella gently to the concrete. He tore the coat from his shoulders in one motion, folded it hard against her chest, and pressed with both hands. The dark stain on the gray wool sweater pushed up against the fabric of his coat and was slowed, only slightly, by the pressure of his palms. Emma knelt beside her mother. She had pulled the small stuffed rabbit out from beside her and pressed it against her mother's chest just below Alessandro's hands, using both of her small fists to hold it there. The red-painted stone was still tight in her right hand, warm and steady, resting against the corner of the folded coat like an offering that had refused to leave her fingers. Alessandro looked up. Salvatore Jr. was already stepping forward, sliding his pistol across the concrete floor toward Alessandro's boot. Alessandro picked it up in one clean motion. Marco had turned to run. He had not been fast enough. Alessandro fired twice. The first round struck Marco's leg, just above the knee. The second struck his right hand, sending the pistol clattering across the concrete into a stack of pallets. Marco went down. Alessandro crossed the warehouse floor in 6 long steps. Marco lay curled on his side, his left hand pressed against the bleeding wound at his hip. He laughed thinly through his teeth. "You still shoot as well as you used to, boss." Alessandro knelt beside him and pressed the muzzle of the pistol firmly against Marco's chest, just above the heart. "Talk, all of it, before I let you die." Marco knew. He laughed again, wet and quiet, and then he began. The daylight ambush 3 weeks earlier, Marco had handed the convoy schedule to Vito Salieri himself. He had chosen the route. He had chosen the hour. He had hoped Alessandro would die that afternoon in the back of the middle car. The kidnapping Marco had shut down the vehicle cameras with his own hand on the morning drive. Marco had introduced the sedative gas into the ventilation system of the escort cars, drugging 2 of his own men. Marco had personally handed Emma into Vito's custody at a warehouse loading bay off the Belt Parkway. The long plan Marco had been in negotiation with Vito for 8 months. The arrangement was simple. Vito would kill Alessandro. Marco would take over the Moretti organization. Vito would receive the Southern Territory as his reward. Isabella Marco had known about Emma since the second week Alessandro began visiting Queens. He had followed him. He had considered killing both mother and child early, before Alessandro's feelings could deepen. He had waited instead, because a man in love is a man with a soft place, and a soft place is bait. Marco's voice grew weaker, but his eyes stayed on Alessandro's face as he spoke the last of it. "You do not deserve everything. Ale. You were not born to hold the crown. Your father was wrong to give it to you instead of me. I had stood beside him since I was 18 years old. You were only 12, and yet he chose you." Alessandro listened. He did not interrupt. He did not strike him. On the concrete floor behind him, Isabella was still breathing, though her breaths were shallow now. Emma had not moved. Her small hands still pressed the rabbit and the red stone against her mother's chest, the way a child holds the world together when the adults have stopped being able to. Alessandro asked, very quietly, "Is there anything else you want to say?" Marco's smile flickered. "Yes, Vito is still out there. You will not make it out of here, boss." Alessandro stood up slowly. He looked down at the man who had been his brother in everything but blood for a decade. "You are wrong. Vito is not my problem anymore. My problem is getting my wife and my daughter out of here alive. Vito I will settle with on the way. He had one bullet left in the chamber, one shadow to erase, and one family lying on a concrete floor who had just heard him call them, for the first time out loud, his. Alessandro rose to his full height. He looked down at Marco Ricci one last time. There was nothing in his face, no rage, no grief, no farewell. Only the flat, final quiet of a door being closed on a room that would never be opened again. He did not speak. He squeezed the trigger. A single dry crack. And then silence. He did not look at the body. He turned and crossed the concrete back to where Isabella lay. He knelt, slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, and lifted her against his chest. Her head fell to rest against the hollow of his throat. Her breath, faint, warm, was still there. Salvatore Jr. gathered Rocco upright and slung one bloodied arm across his shoulders. Rocco was still conscious. He could walk if someone held him. Emma stood without needing to be told. She kept one small hand pressed against her mother's sleeve as Alessandro carried her. In her other hand, the little rabbit hung heavy with dark stains now, and the red painted stone gleamed dully between her fingers. The four of them moved. Across the wet concrete of the loading yard, past the tall columns of pallets, out through the shattered western gate. Gunfire still crackled somewhere to the east. Giuseppe and Antonio held their positions inside the fog, weapons steady, returning fire from behind stacked oil drums, giving the four of them the corridor they needed. Alessandro did not turn his head. He did not look for cover. He walked. At the outer edge of the port, past the chain link, the sound of rotors began to grow louder above the fog. The medical helicopter descended into the empty lot beside the water. Alessandro had made the call before he had ever entered Red Hook. They loaded Isabella onto the stretcher first. Emma climbed up after her, refusing to let go of her mother's hand. Alessandro bent down over the stretcher and pressed his lips to Isabella's forehead. "You will live. Do you hear me, Isa? You will live." The rotors lifted. The helicopter rose into the fog, tilted, and began to move west across the bay. He stood on the empty asphalt and watched the small dark shape shrink into the graying sky until it disappeared. Behind him, Salvatore Jr. waited. "Boss, do you want to go back?" Alessandro did not answer in words. He only turned and held out his hand. Salvatore Jr. placed a long rifle into it. At the eastern end of the yard, the primary assault had done its work. Alessandro's men had breached the central warehouse. Vito Salieri had been cornered in the far bay with four of his last men, his most senior, the ones who had ridden with him through every deal, every quiet murder, every quiet promise. Alessandro walked in alone. He stopped 10 feet from Vito. He raised the rifle. He did not lower it. There was no long dialogue. There was no speech. There was only one sentence, spoken quietly, evenly, without any music beneath it. "You should not have touched my daughter." 4 dry cracks in the fog, and then silence. Alessandro walked back out of the warehouse. The sun was beginning to rise over the bay. The first band of red-pink light touched the surface of the water and turned it briefly, softly, the color of a wound closing. Salvatore Jr. fell into step beside him. "Boss, it is done." Alessandro stopped and looked out across the harbor. "Yes, it is done." He was not speaking of Vito Salieri. He was speaking of 15 years. Salvatore Jr. did not ask him to explain. He only stood beside the older man in the widening light and watched the sun come up over Red Hook Bay for the first time in either of their lives without looking at it through the sights of a gun. He had ended a war that had been fought for 15 years. He had ended a betrayal that had been growing for 10. Now he had to find out whether he had also lost the woman who had once taught him long before Emma was born that love was worth more than any kingdom he would ever build. A private hospital on the northern edge of the city. White fluorescent lights that never softened, no matter what hour of the night pressed against the windows. The surgery took 7 hours. The chief surgeon walked into the corridor a little after 4 in the morning. He was still wearing his surgical mask around his neck. His voice was tired but clear. The bullet missed her heart by 3 centimeters. She was very lucky. She will live. Alessandro was already on his feet before the last word ended. He did not answer. He only nodded, once, and let the man walk away. He sat back down. His hands were still crusted with dried blood. Hers, mostly, some of it not. His shirt collar was stiff with it. He had not gone home. He had not showered. He had not so much as loosened his tie, because he had not been wearing one. Beside him on the plastic hospital chair, Emma had finally fallen asleep. Her head rested against his shoulder, small and warm. In one hand, she held the little stuffed rabbit the nurses had gently cleaned it, though a faint shadow remained in the seam of one ear. In her other hand, still, was the small red painted stone. Alessandro looked down at her. He bent his head and pressed his lips to her forehead. Emma's eyes opened halfway. She whispered, without lifting her head from his shoulder, "Daddy, I want to go home." Something inside Alessandro Moretti, something that had been sealed shut for 20 years, gave way. The tears came silently. He did not make a sound. He did not lift his hand to wipe them. He simply let them fall, warm and slow, into her hair. He stroked her head very gently. "We will go home, sweetheart, but not to the old house, to a new one. No high walls, no bodyguards, only Daddy, and Mama, and you." Emma smiled in her sleep, as if she had heard him from somewhere far and very safe. 2 days later, Isabella opened her eyes. Alessandro was already there beside the bed. He had not left the hospital. He had not slept in a bed. He had washed his hands and his face at a small sink, but that was all. Emma stood on the other side of the bed, both of her small hands closed carefully around one of her mother's. Isabella looked at Alessandro. She looked at Emma. She smiled a faint, tired, unmistakable smile. She whispered, "I never stopped loving you, Ale." He lowered his forehead to the back of her hand. She continued, more softly still, "I only did not want her to grow up somewhere she had to learn not to stand near the windows." "I know," he whispered against her fingers. "I know now. What will you do?" "I will leave," he said. "I will give it all up. I will take the two of you far from here, as far as we need to go." "Are you sure, Ale?" "I have been sure since the night you told me the truth. I only did not have the courage to say it out loud." Her hand tightened weakly around his. The small silver locket rested against the hollow of her throat, its tiny chain still intact. The dried blood had been cleaned away by a kind nurse. For the first time in 7 years, Alessandro looked at it up close. He reached forward and, with careful fingers, opened the small clasp of the locket. Inside was a photograph. Not of him, of Emma, 3 years old. A small girl in a red dress, laughing at something outside the frame. Alessandro did not speak. He only closed the locket, brought it briefly to his lips, and then leaned forward and kissed Isabella's forehead. Emma reached across the bed and placed her small hand over both of theirs. He had built an empire in 15 years. He was about to take it apart in 7 days, and every hour of dismantling it would feel lighter than the 10 seconds he had spent, back on the concrete warehouse floor, choosing his family over his crown. 7 days. That was all it took. Alessandro Moretti called in the men who had followed him for a lifetime, and one by one, he laid the empire down. The legitimate businesses, the restaurants along Mulberry Street, the 2 hotels in the theater district, the construction company that had built half the office towers in Long Island City, he signed over to Salvatore Jr., along with the responsibility of keeping every one of them clean. The rest, the operations that had lived only in shadow for 3 generations of the Moretti name, he did not sell, did not transfer, did not pass to anyone. He dissolved them. Every ledger burned, every debt forgiven, every gun surrendered. The captains protested. Some wept, some knelt. One threatened him openly in the sub-basement room where his father had once threatened others. Alessandro answered every one of them with the same sentence: "I have given 15 years to this work. I do not owe it another day. If any of you still hold love for me, let me go." On the 6th morning, he drove to Greenwood Cemetery alone. He stood for a long time before the marble stone that carried his father's name. He did not speak aloud. He only laid a single sunflower against the base of the stone, the flower Emma had planted with him in the back garden of the Westchester house, and turned back to the car. Isabella was discharged on the 10th day. Emma had returned to eating ice cream, strawberry now, not chocolate as before. She had changed something in herself, quietly, the way children do. On the final evening, the 3 of them packed together in the small living room of the Queen's house, the little cream-painted home Isabella had made from nothing, where they had chosen to spend their last 2 weeks in the city. 2 suitcases, the stuffed rabbit, the wooden cross from above the kitchen wall, the silver locket around Isabella's neck, the wooden case of 36 colored pencils, and the small woven basket of colored stones, which Emma packed herself, refusing to let anyone else touch it. Alessandro took the sealed envelope from the drawer of the desk, the paper from Dr. Enrico Falcone that had once broken his life open, and dropped it into the small fireplace. It curled, browned, and vanished. He no longer needed the proof. The proof was outside in the small backyard, laughing with the neighbor's dog. That night, standing by the window, Isabella slid her hand into his. "Are you afraid?" "Only of one thing," he answered, "that I will not be good enough to deserve the 2 of you." She smiled softly against his shoulder. You have deserved us since the afternoon you picked up a red stone and placed it on a little house for someone lonely. They left the city the next morning in a rental car, with 2 suitcases and no forwarding address. The most powerful man in the Amerchado had chosen to become nobody because for the first time in his life, being nobody meant belonging to somebody who loved him back. Sometimes, the fiercest men are not undone by their enemies, but by the smallest hand that reaches out to sit beside them. Alessandro Moretti built an empire in silence and blood, and lost it all to a 6-year-old's kindness on a park bench, and to a basket of colored stones she was using to build a little house for someone lonely. What he gained instead was worth more than every kingdom he had ever held. A wife who had never stopped loving him, a daughter who called him father before she knew the word, and a chance to become the man he was always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it is never too late to choose love over power, family over pride, and forgiveness over revenge. Have you ever been saved by a stranger who did not know they were saving you? A child, a passerby, a small act of kindness that arrived exactly at the moment you thought no one would come. Please share your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and every one of them matters. We wish each of you watching today good health, a peaceful heart, and a joyful life every single day. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.